In this video, I'm going to be changing the steering head bearings. The bike I'm working on in this video is a 2017 KTM 300 EXC, and it's fitted with X-Trig Rocks triple clamps. The stock triple clamps, the method to change the steering head bearings is exactly the same. Other bikes will be very similar. You can use similar methods and similar tools. The interval to change the steering head bearings will largely depend on how you ride, in what conditions, and how often you overhaul the steering head bearings. If you clean them regularly and re-grease, they should last a very long time. If you ride in very harsh conditions, or they become contaminated with gasoline or a solvent, you'll need to replace them much more quickly. One easy test is to put the bike on a stand and move the handlebars. If the motion is free and you don't feel any grittiness, they're probably fine, and you can overhaul them. If you do feel any resistance, particularly if it feels notchy, the steering head bearings probably need replacing. On pretty much all bikes, you're going to have two sets of taper roller bearings, one on the top, one on the bottom. The top set is pretty easy to replace. The bottom set is more challenging because the inner race is pressed onto the triple clamp stem, and you need a press to do that. So I'll show all of that. The first step is to remove the forks and remove the triple clamps. Okay, so I've removed the forks and handlebars, and I've loosened the pinch bolt on the triple clamp upper and loosened this, and I'm going to remove the triple clamps now. And you should note the O-ring here on top of the dust cover, so when you replace it, make sure you have that O-ring there. And I'm going to go ahead and take the dust cover off, and also the upper roller bearing simply lifts out. And then you can see there's a rubber seal here on the outer, which you can easily take off like that. And then the tapered roller bearing is two pieces, and there's a cup which is lightly pressed into the frame. So there's one here, and there's also one on the underside. And when you're changing the bearings, it's important that you change both the tapered roller bearing race and also the cup as well. So these need to be knocked out. So I'm going to do that next. And then to remove the race, you can either use a screwdriver and carefully hammer it out from underneath, and do the same for the bottom one. But I made this tool out of some pipe. I simply cut it and spread it out to fit the diameter of the bearing race, and then this fits it up inside the steering head, and you can easily knock it out in a couple of blows. The reason I cut out one of the pieces is on the EXC models and XCWs, they have a steering lock here, and the lock mechanism would interfere if you had four pieces. So I just removed one anyway. So you fit the tool up inside, position it on the bearing race, make sure it's seated there, and then just using a hammer, you hammer it out. And every so often check to make sure it's aligned and going okay. And it pops out pretty easily. And then you just repeat the process for the lower bearing race. So again, make sure it's positioned on the bearing race, and then you can hammer it out. Okay, so here you can see all the parts I just removed. We've got an O-ring which sits on top of the dust cover, and underneath the dust cover is a rubber seal which sits on the frame. You've got the upper taper roller bearing and the roller bearing cups, upper and lower. And still pressed onto the stem is the lower taper roller bearing and a seal underneath it. The lower taper roller bearing is pressed onto the stem, so you can't just pull it off with your hands. So there's several different methods you could use to remove it, so I'll explain your options now. To remove the lower bearing race, which is pressed onto the stem, there's three main methods you could use. One is to cut the bearing off. So you can use some cutters to remove the cage, and then the cone inside, you can use a high-speed rotary tool to create a slot, and then a chisel tool. Carefully hammer that into the slot and it will crack the cone through, and then you can remove it. Second method is to press the stem out of the lower triple clamp using a hydraulic press. So you simply put the clamp in your press and then press the pin out this way. And then the third method is what I'm going to be showing on this video, is to cut the cage off and then using a bearing puller to pull it off the stem. And I think that is, well, that's my preferred method, and I consider it the lowest risk method of damaging anything. So I'm going to show how I do that. Okay, so the first step is to use some cutters. I'm using some heavy duty cutters. You could use a rotary tool as well, just to cut the cage off. It comes off pretty easily, so you just need to cut into it. Okay, so I've removed the bearing cage and rollers, and you can see the cone has a lip around it, around the top, which you can attach a bearing puller onto it to pull it off the stem. So I'm going to set up the bearing puller and pull that off now. So here you can see my setup to remove the bearing cone. It's a gear puller, so I'll show a close-up of the lower section. But it's attached to the lip of the cone, and then I've got some extensions, and then I'm going to put this aluminium plate here so I don't damage the end of the stem, and then you just simply screw this down and it pulls the cone off the stem. Okay, so here you can see a close-up of the gear puller set attached to the just below the lip of the bearing cone, and I'm going to start pulling up on it using a wrench, and it should just pull off pretty easily. Yeah, I could feel it coming up now. And it's off. And that's what the lower seal looks like with the bearing cone removed. So when I was using the gear puller set, I don't think you could see the end of the screw. It's got a hex end, and just use a wrench on it to wind it down, and that pulls the bearing off. So I really like this method. It's quick and easy and minimal chance of damaging the triple clamp. This is the gear puller set I have. It has two sets of jaws. I was using the smaller set. Various extensions, the screw piece, the top bridge, and some different jaws as well. Pretty handy if you work on your car as well. This is super handy for working on cars. Okay, so I've removed all the parts from the triple clamps and I'm ready to install the new bearings. Regarding new bearings, you have two choices. You could either purchase the required bearings individually and just replace those, or if the seals need replacing as well, your best option is to purchase the KTM OEM steering head repair kit. I'll put the part number of the repair kit and also bearings in the description of the video. And the repair kit includes the bearings, dust cover, both the upper and lower seals, and two different size O-rings. So when replacing the O-ring, make sure you select the same size as the one that was installed. And all of my seals look in good shape, so I'm going to reuse them and just install new bearings. So I'm going to use these NTN bearings. You can save quite a bit of money if you don't need to replace the seals and just buy these instead, or SKF or a similar high quality bearing. And each bearing, you've got the cup and the taper bearing with the cone inside. And these come as a set, so it's a good idea to keep the cup and the bearing together and use them as a set and not mix up the two parts. I think they're matched precisely, so always a good idea to not mix them up. But before you use them, it's important to grease them up. So I'm going to show you how I grease the bearings. And to grease the headset bearings, I'm using Motorex 2000. This is a yellowy green color, and it's fairly thick, and it's waterproof, and it stays in place. It doesn't just drip down and run out. So I really like this for headset and also wheel bearing applications. So to grease the bearings, I always use rubber gloves because it gets pretty messy. But put some grease in one hand and then just grab the bearing and then you press it down into the grease on your hand. And just repeat that. And after a while, you'll see the grease coming up through the bearing cage, and then you know it's fully greased. And you can just work around like that. You can see it coming up through the bearing cage. It's pretty easy. It's a bit messy, but you don't need any special tools to do this. Okay, so now I'm ready to install the lower taper roller bearing. I've got my seal installed. I've cleaned everything up, and there's no dirt or grit, and I put the bearing over the stem and push it down and try and get it as level as possible. And I've got the triple clamp sitting on a steel plate. And then to make sure that I don't damage the cage or the roller bearings while I'm pressing the bearing on, I'm going to be using this pipe. So the ID is 30 millimeters and the OD is 34. So ideal size to fit over the cone and not interfere with the cage. And I've got the length, so it's slightly longer than the length of the stem when it's fully pressed on. You obviously need it slightly longer, otherwise the stem will interfere with pressing. Okay, so I have everything lined up now, and my press is a 20-ton pneumatically controlled press, and you can also hand operate it as well. So initially I'm going to do pneumatic and close this down and recheck the alignment. Okay, so I checked the alignment of everything and it looks good, so I'm going to hand operate the press now, and it should press on pretty easily. It's going on nicely. And that is fully on now. And here you can see the new bearing pressed onto the stem. And I want to point out again that when you press it on, you should only press it on on the cone of the bearing, the inner part, and not the cage where the taper roller bearings sit. If you damage the cage, it could interfere with the operation. So if I put on the tube that I used to press it on, you can see it only touches the inner part of the bearing, the cone part, and not the cage. And the next step is to install the bearing cups. And I've marked the lower one lower. As I mentioned before, the bearings come as a set, so it's a good idea to use the cup that the bearing comes with. And I'm going to put these into the freezer for about 30 minutes to shrink the size, as they are a light press fit into the frame, and they'll just go in much easier if they're cold. And then to install the cups into the frame, I'm going to be using this Tokyo Off-Road headset bearing press tool, which I do sell on the Tokyo Off-Road webshop. I'll put a link in the description in case you'd like to purchase one. It's a pretty simple tool. This part locates in the frame, and then you put your bearing cup onto the press tool, pass this through the frame, put that on, tighten it up, and it presses the cup into the frame nice and straight, minimizes any chance of the cup canting while you're pressing it in. So I find this tool very easy to use and minimizes any chance of making mistakes and damaging the cups. So I'll show how to use that once the cups have sat in the freezer for about 30 minutes. Okay, so I'm ready to install the lower bearing cup. I've just got it out the freezer and put it on the tool like that, pass this through, locate it on the frame, and then line this up inside the frame, and then just need to put the washer and nut on the tool and then start doing it up. So check it's lined up initially so it drives in straight. That looks good. And I should mention that I cleaned up the frame, both top and bottom, removed any dirt. And once it's fully installed, I can feel it now. You can tell when it's bottomed out, and you don't need to crank down on it, just make sure it's seated. And then you can remove the tool and repeat for the top roller bearing cup. Okay, so I just got the top cup out the freezer. I install that on the tool. Make sure you obviously press it in the right way round. That would not be fun having to remove that and reinstall it. And I can feel there it's fully pressed in now. So this tool makes it really easy to press in the cups and minimize any chance of damage to the cups. They're quite wide, so it's quite easy to get them canted if you're trying to hammer them in. And here's a better view of the top installed roller bearing cup. And I'm going to install the seal. And as you saw, I did fully grease the bearings, but I'm going to apply a little bit of grease to the bearing cups as well, and a little bit to the seal. Okay, so now I'm ready to install the lower triple clamp. Simply pass this through and then install the upper taper roller bearing onto the stem. I've got quite a bit of grease on there, so I'm just going to remove the excess grease and then put on the dust cover and then my O-ring, and then I can put the top triple clamp on. And then I put the top bolt on just to hold everything in place. And I'm just going to snug this bolt down lightly. And I'll do the final torquing once I've got the forks in, everything assembled. Okay, so I've installed the fork legs, the front wheel and the handlebars. I've compressed the suspension several times. The fork pinch bolts on the triple clamps, I've tightened the lower ones to spec and the top ones are loose, so the top plate can move. And that's important because I'm going to be torquing the bolt at the top, which pushes the top triple clamp down. If it can't move, it's not going to torque correctly. And this bolt needs to be torqued to 12 Newton meters. So I've got my torque wrench ready and I'm going to torque it. And the bike's sitting on the ground, so the weight is pushing it down. I recommend checking this after your first ride or a short ride, just to make sure it's still okay. And then the pinch bolt on the top triple clamp is torqued to 17 Newton meters. And I've already put some medium strength Loctite, blue Loctite on there. Okay, so that is the steering head bearing replacement complete. I've torqued everything to spec. I've torqued the fork pinch bolts to spec as well. And before you ride it, put it on a work stand like I have now and check that the steering moves freely and there's no strange play or anything. So that feels good. It's all ready for a test ride. After a short ride, come back, loosen the top triple clamp and this pinch bolt and check this is at 12 Newton meters, and then retighten everything and you should be good to go. The steering head bearing maintenance, very important, so it's a good idea to add it to your regular maintenance. Re-grease and check the bearings are in good shape. If they're not, replace them. If they look good, just grease them up and re-torque. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it useful.